right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Just going to give a few minutes for people to join in, but we can slowly get started here. If you're here for how to use webinars to drive massive pipeline, you're in the right place. My name is Scott Strand, and I'll be hosting today's webinar along with Lauren Farrell, who I'll introduce in just a few moments. But yeah, as people join in, I'm going to just go through a few housekeeping items and get started slowly here. So before we begin, today's session is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with you at some point later today, just via email if you're registered and here. So you can also use the Q&A section to submit any questions for our panelists to answer at the end. So feel free to submit those, and we'll get to those there. If you have any questions after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to us at MarketerHire.com. We'd be happy to help. We'd be happy to answer any questions. And yeah, I'm tuning in from Minneapolis, Minnesota today. And if you want to share your location in the chat, we can see just how global we've got today from our audience attending. And let me just get into the agenda here quick. All right. So today's session, we'll be covering some of the following topics. First, we'll be crafting irresistible webinar topics for your target audience. We'll talk about the importance of that, how to do it. Next, we'll be covering then the best practices for maximizing registrants and attendees, a very important part of any webinar program. Then we'll explain some time and take some time to talk about nurturing and converting webinar leads into pipeline. We're thinking about webinars as a growth tactic here today, not just a brand exercise, but how can we get those converted into pipeline? And finally, I'll just give some closing remarks, kind of recap the day, and then we'll save some time to answer your questions, which a bunch of you had already submitted great questions ahead of time, but continue to keep them coming in the chat. All right. So again, formally, as a lot of people have joined in, I am Scott Strand. I'm a webinar consultant at MarketerHire, and I also work in growth at HawksHunt. I formerly worked at Rippling, Clearbit, Jamf, and through all of these positions, I've worked on webinars. So that has kind of been a point of core competency of mine. I've really seen a lot of different types of webinars, different audiences, how they can work and be applied, mostly to B2B SaaS companies, but have lots of experience looking at other different companies and other industries, how they work. So yeah, I'm going to be covering a lot of that today. Make sure to follow me on LinkedIn if you have questions for me directly after. But then also today I am joined by Lauren, who I'll let introduce herself.
Hi, thanks so much, Scott. Excited to be here. I'm also a webinar consultant here at MarketerHire, and I'm currently the head of digital marketing at Centripetal. Before that, I was with MarketScale, a marketing consulting company, and the Pittsburgh Pirates. So spent a lot of time in content and video production. So really looking forward to being here with you all today.
Awesome. Happy to have you. All right, I'll keep it going right along. All right. So just to start things off, I kind of like to start up framing the opportunity of webinars and then also highlight the challenges of webinars. We're all most likely here today because we realize the business opportunities that webinars can provide, for whether you're B2B, B2C, or in different industries from each other, they all can kind of provide this opportunity to reach your customers and really engage with them. So at best, webinars can be entertaining, engaging, and clearly communicate your company's value or whatever value prop you're trying to portray. And they can be powerful signals of intent for GTM teams like marketing and sales to then prioritize their efforts toward. So all of these factors can lead to really driving real business impact, and all stemming from this webinar engagement. But at worst, webinars can feel kind of out of date or tacky, or feel like you just unintentionally signed up for a sales pitch. And I think we've all been to bad webinars like this. Without the proper time, care, and investment to make them feel really great, audience members can feel that. And from clunky slides or animations to unengaging speakers to dull or unhelpful content that clearly has like a biased agenda, webinars can leave attendees with a bad taste in their mouth, which ultimately hurts the hosting company's brand in addition to, not probably meeting your growth goals with that webinar. So the question kind of is why are there so many bad webinars out there? I think kind of the simplistic answer is that webinars seem relatively easy to produce. They don't incur much cost, and they have all that potential upside, which I've hinted at. But the reality is that running good webinars, webinars that actually interest, engage, and influence audience members to take action, and then doing that at scale, takes kind of a really solid long-term strategy and then consistent, excellent execution also. And unfortunately, the expectation of results often kind of exceeds the resources that are made available. And so you get all these teams rushing to host a bunch of webinars without really a proper strategy or proper execution, which leads to these bad webinars, like where people aren't prepared or the content isn't great. So yeah, and the fact is, good webinars take time. As mentioned, webinars can be very cost effective, often because they're produced fully in-house and companies can have the internal expertise they need on the topic, and they can utilize that for free. But despite low direct costs, companies will still pay indirectly because good webinars take time and talent to create, promote, and execute overall. So for example, my typical Asana task template for every new webinar includes 63 different subtasks of varying difficulties and timelines. And they're mostly assigned to me, so that takes up a lot of my time, but also requires help from other teammates too, like a design person or a copywriter. And these tasks range from doing, guest outreach to setting up registration pages, to designing the promotional assets, to crafting the slide deck, to setting up follow-up sequences, and lots more in between, lots of little steps. So there's a lot of these small tasks, but all kind of necessary to really make a webinar happen and happen well, and let alone, have a great topic as well. So on top of all that, good webinars require choosing a relevant and interesting topic, creating an engaging presentation, and then facilitating that user experience while running activities that kind of convert that engagement into actual business impact. So all in all, tons of things to consider, lots of moving pieces for every webinar. And like all good content, trying to speed things up can really hinder the quality and results of a webinar. So, but despite all this doom and gloom and lots of work, I'm speaking about webinars today because they work, at least especially when done right. I've built and scaled, like I mentioned, the webinar programs at Rippling, Clearbit, Jamf, Hoxhunt, and now MarketerHire. And over the next 30 minutes or so, I'll be covering all my wins and fails over the year and kind of uncovering what I found to be the winning formula for, webinars that have driven tens of millions of dollars in pipeline and millions of dollars in closed ARR as well. All right. So just to give you a quick overview again of what I'm going to cover in the next section here, I'm going to basically take you through the areas I feel like are the most important and impactful to running a good webinar. First, I'm a firm believer that the actual topic itself is key to gaining the interest of your audience to make all that work of executing worth it. So I'll be covering some of the best advice for finding those webinar topics that resonate with your audience and then have the best chance of maximizing the growth outcomes. Very similar, we'll next talk about kind of maximizing registrants and attendees, which is obviously a huge part of the success of a webinar. You need people to show up and see the content to be able to be influenced by it. So the more people you have there, the better chance you have of getting the outcomes you want. And then finally, I will share top tips and tricks I've learned over the years for executing effective marketing and sales follow-up and converting that into pipeline. So there's actually quite a few things I've changed over the years to really make it as effective as possible. Make sure you're kind of squeezing all the juice from each webinar as much as you can. So we'll get into that to make it kind of, a results-driven growth tactic versus just a brand strategy. So let's get started. First up, just going to start talking about crafting irresistible webinar topics for your ideal prospects. In my opinion, I find that, again, the webinar topic matters so much. It's a huge indicator of whether it's going to be successful. And I think the best webinar topics are relevant to a large portion of your target audience. The best topics address your audience's current and biggest challenges. And then the best topics also suggest or hint that they will receive something valuable as a result of signing up and attending. Just to give you an example of this, we ran a webinar at Rippling, how to legally hire international contractors. And we chose this topic because we knew that the legal process around hiring these international contractors was very murky and difficult. So by offering a webinar where we hinted at the legal ramifications and promised some clarity around these regulations, we created some FUD or fear, uncertainty, and doubt in our prospects while simultaneously offering a solution to that. So the webinar is kind of perfect for anyone who is hiring or thinking about hiring international contractors. And this webinar ended up receiving over 1,500 registrations just from our standard email and ad promotions and just having internal hosts, no big splashy guests or companies joining. It was just all internal. So that's just kind of to reiterate, like a webinar's title can kind of make or break the performance. So spending some extra time here and thinking about what makes a great topic and how to position it is very worthwhile, in my opinion. The description and quick overview will also provide, the additional context you need for someone who's interested to come and like actually sign up. But the webinar title does the heavy lifting in terms of like piquing interest from a quick read and then getting the click to learn more. I would also advise everyone to consider how you like think about your promotion when you're kind of figuring out how to position the topic. So, your audience will be skimming through their work emails or scrolling through social media at lunch when they see your email or ad. So just making sure everything is concise, clear, to the point, and then being able to summarize the value within the title is very important, which it can be more difficult than you think, but it's very important. And then it's kind of an art and a science picking the perfect webinar title where there's no simple formula for like what will work every time. You'll kind of eventually over time find that you'll get a mix of winners, losers, and a bunch in between. And I kind of liken it actually to picking Hollywood movies. Like picking webinar topics is much like the process where studios deploy tons of effort and resources to kind of test and validate movie pitches before investing these large amounts of money into production. Yet there's always going to be quite a few winners, quite a few losers, and then a bunch in between. And it's just to kind of illustrate there's no perfect answer here. It's why movies like Barbie and Madam Web can both get like giant budgets, but one completely flops and one sets new records. But over time, you should start to slowly understand what kind of topics lead to more success with your audience, and then start to like drive a preference towards picking those ones. So maybe it's a how-to format. Maybe it takes a great guest every time to increase enough interest. Or maybe it's topics related to a certain like product capability that you can kind of zoom in on and have more angles and angles on for the content. And then I can't understate the importance of giving your webinar program time to kind of see what your audience likes and understand that not every webinar will be a hit. I've seen leadership kind of like lose all hope in webinars after one bad topic. So setting expectations that it's kind of, not a guessing game, like a measured guessing game, but like that you will have good ones, you will have worse ones, and like the overall impact of the webinar program over time is really key to really focus on. And then, yeah, in addition to like the actual topic itself, kind of like the webinar type and like the format that you have and how you target it really is important. So I'll let Lauren talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is not exhaustive at all, but it's definitely important once you kind of think through those topics. You want to think of the medium in which you're going to show that webinar. So types, it could be educational focused, product demo, workshops, case studies. So really thinking what that type and how you'll execute it. And as I said, it's not exhaustive. You could have fireside chats or Q&A sessions or a panel. So there's different ways to create the same webinar. You could have a product demo that is literally just a slide deck and a salesperson, or you could have one that is an actual demonstration that you're recording in a studio. So there's so many different ways to think this through. And when you're thinking that through, it's also important to figure out how you're segmenting your audience. Is it by the funnel stage? Are they top of funnel? Maybe that's a more educational focused webinar, and maybe it's a panel that's educational. Maybe it's thinking through your ICP or the industry, or maybe the type of product they'd be interested in. So there's so many different layers to customize. There's no right or wrong choice. As Scott said, you have to give it time and kind of understand what formats, what audiences, what types of webinars work for different people. And it might be that case studies work great for a specific ICP and that's it, or that workshops are really great for a specific industry you're targeting or a specific stage in the funnel. So there's probably a million different combinations of webinars you could do. And so it's important to trial different ones, and how you execute yours and structure yours could be very, very different than not just a competitor in another company, but even someone else in your company that might also be running webinars. And Scott, we'll leave it to
Yeah,
you.
perfect. So yeah, while picking a great topic in the right format and type is the most important way to kind of maximize your registration and attendance and really host a successful webinar. Beyond that, there are a lot of tactical ways to promote webinars in a way that scales registration and improves your chance for a greater ROI on all that time invested. So promoting your webinar is, of course, a very important aspect of hosting one at all if your goal is business impact. The more people that register for your webinar is the more people seeing the content, which means, there's more intent signals for marketing and sales teams to follow up on, and overall just increases the chance of pipeline conversion. So something important to consider before you start creating webinars is your promotional power. This just means that when running a promotion through all of your available channels, what is the average amount of people that you are able to convert to register for your webinar? And the promotional power of every organization will vary widely. For some, it might be easy to get 1,000 registrants. For others, it might be really difficult pulling teeth to pull together 20 registrants. So things like, there's a lot of things that depends on. It's things like your company, the size of your company's email database, or the size of your social media following, or the size of the ad budget that you have, can all make a huge impact on how many people you actually reach. Additionally, I think brand efficacy plays a big part here too. If you have invested a lot into your brand, you probably will have a greater trust from the audience that you reach than a company who has built no brand reputation or loyalty over time. A brand like Slack is going to have way higher conversion rates than a brand new startup promoting the exact same webinar topic to the exact same audience. That is just kind of something that goes hand in hand and was what makes the big world of marketing so tricky, because you kind of need to balance all of these different aspects. That being said, no matter what your promotional power is, there are a few key channels that most marketers will use to drive registration, and I'm going to highlight some of these here, while also kind of giving you an outline of what maybe a standard promotion plan looks like for a webinar. So assuming that you have a sizable audience that you can reach via email and social media, and maybe some budget for targeted advertising, here's what I typically suggest as a promotion plan for at least B2B SaaS webinars on a budget. I usually always have 2 promotional emails, and those will also almost always be your main method of promotion. I suggest sending 2 over the course of the 2 weeks, one at the 2 weeks before to reach your audience with the initial announcement and details, and then another one to kind of remind those who may have missed that email or didn't take action the first time. Spacing these out will help to not overwhelm your audience, which can lead to unsubscribes, which you have to be careful for. And I would also always suggest avoiding Mondays and Fridays just because they have lower engagement than the rest of the week. You can also consider sending a third email on the day of, but sometimes this can be overkill if your audience is receiving other marketing emails from your brand as well. So it'll really be up to you. how much is it worth sending that third email, and tracking how much registration that email additionally will cause. Then I like to suggest also 2 social media posts. Organic social media posts are great for, to reach your company's follower base or your speakers' individual connections. And it's a great because it's free. It's a nice reminder. You can reach more people too outside of email, either people you don't have their email information for, or people who just don't read and respond and engage with marketing emails. So, and I would say you can also just go as low as 1. You can post 1 or 2, but if you post 2, just make sure the content is varied a little bit. Typically, I'll try to kind of have the original post with like static image, webinar title, date, time, details, and then I'll have another one where it's maybe video, a quick video from one of the speakers talking about like join the webinar. And then if you are lucky enough to have a little bit of budget to promote your webinars, you can also launch ads via LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and even Reddit to try to garner some net new prospects. All I'll say here is you will want to start small and be careful, like to measure all the impact based on a few cost metrics, particularly cost per impression, cost per click, and most importantly, cost per registrant. Because paid advertising for webinars is definitely not worth it for everyone. The math might not make sense for you. If you're getting webinar registrants for $5-10 a pop, that's great, and I'd say that's probably worth it to you. If it's starting to cross over $100, that might be where it's like maybe it's not worth spending that $100 to get someone who might not even attend. But that being said, it's worth testing. I think doing small tests to see if it works for you is right. And of course, I'll just mention again, this was like a situation for a B2B SaaS webinar, but your promotion plan may vary a lot depending on your business. This is what I've found to be successful for this, but it might vary from there. And to just give you an example of what some of these assets could look like, I've included some examples of a webinar invite from Hoxhunt on the left, an organic social media post from MarketerHire's company page in the middle, and then some paid social designs we use to promote a Rippling webinar. While all of these are of high design quality, the exact design styling matters less than actually just clearly communicating the webinar's value prop across all these channels. So concisely explaining the benefits to joining is what will really maximize your registration. And then eventually, as you'll see on the right with the ads, if you do have a wide enough reach, you can also start to experiment with different messaging or different design styles to see what works best. It's obviously, if you're paying or using your channels to promote, there's somewhat of a cost. So if you can increase the conversion of these channels at all over time, that really helps a lot. For example, with the Rippling webinars, we found that the lighter backgrounds really worked a lot better than the darker backgrounds. So that kind of informed our strategy going forward and led to just more efficient promotions from then on. So that is always helpful. All right, and then kind of to talk about attendance, we talk quite a bit about registration already, but if your promotional tactics lead to registration but not attendance, is that bad? It's like, is there still a value if they don't see the actual content that you are going to produce? And my argument would be yes, there is still value. Just because, especially in a sales-led business, they just provided a very powerful signal of intent that tells your marketing and sales teams that, one, they're interested enough in this topic to block off 30 minutes of their time. So when, for example, a sales reach rep would reach out to these people, they might, be more open to engaging, giving contact information, booking another 30 minutes. It just kind of shows that they are a little more primed for the end goal. And I call it warm outreach when sales will reach out to a webinar registrant versus just cold outreach. And I find that converts in response into opportunity about 4 to 5 times better than just cold outreach. So SDRs are always super happy to jump on these leads and like prioritize these above just some of their cold outbound prospects. That being said, attendance can be very powerful. So not only does it make sure that your content is actually consumed by the registrant, but it also demonstrates that these leads are taking time out of their day to hear from your brand, making, again, more likely that they will take more time out of their day to hear from a sales rep, which is that later stage goal. So it's smart to prioritize these people for follow-up. And since attendees provide more value than registrants, it's kind of worth considering how to increase attendance as well. And there's a few things I've found that are best to increase attendance. None are magic silver bullets for getting 100% attendance. But like all of these things can kind of add up to increase the percentage. First, you want to make sure that it's very easy for registrants to add the webinar to their calendar. This is like the biggest determinant if someone is actually free versus busy on the webinar at the time of. And so while I think all webinar tools basically will offer some sort of automated confirmation email with calendar, save to calendar buttons. I kind of prefer to create and send my own in my company's branding just to make it feel more personable, and then also be able to customize the messaging a little further. You still need to make sure that you're offering a one-click link to all of the major calendar providers like Apple iCal, Microsoft Outlook, and Gmail at a minimum. But yeah, and then also related to confirmations, you also want to make sure you're using reminder emails wisely. A lot of platforms will also have these automated reminders. But I find that, just making sure it's on your attendees' radar again. Sometimes, someone has registered for a webinar 2 weeks ago. It might not be top of mind for them when it's happening the next day. So I typically send a reminder 24 hours before the webinar is set to occur, and then send another about an hour before the webinar starts. And if you can provide any extra value, like a blog post, related resource, in those messages, that can always be viewed as another beneficial thing to make the person value that email more. So yeah, there's no perfect answer here, but those reminders and confirmation help. And I'll just show an example quick. On the left is a webinar confirmation email that we send with HawksHunt. And as you can see, we just make those Apple, Outlook, Google Calendar buttons super big. It's just one click and it adds right to their calendar. So we try to keep that attendance as high as possible through making sure people add it there. And then in addition to that, people often start to test sending and incentivizing attendance with gifts or gift cards, things like that. I've tested this quite a bit, especially at Rippling. We had a lot where we'd offer a swag item or a $5 Starbucks gift card, things like that. The only thing you'll want to be careful there is that you want to make sure the costs don't add up, that you're very much seeing the reward of getting more attendance for the full cost of all the gifts you have to give out, all the incentives. It can ultimately be up to your own cost equation. Like I mentioned, if you're having huge deals and you see that attendance increases the chance of an opportunity starting, then it can be worth a lot more. But if you have a small ACV and maybe attendance and registrants don't change that much, then it might not be worth incentivizing the attendance like this. Finally, to wrap this section up, it's a good idea to run a few webinars and see how many registrants and attendees you can get when you exhaust all your promotional channels. This will kind of give you a baseline, and then you can forecast your results and make it easier to determine how you kind of prioritize webinars against other growth tactics. For example, it helps with leadership if you could say, hey, we're only going to be able to get 10 registrants for this kind of a topic because of the targeting, because of the way we can promote it. Then that can just kind of stop that conversation there, as opposed to becoming this huge project that leads to unsatisfactory results. And you can always attempt to get more registrants with dedicated effort, but just know that you have a certain baseline. You're only going to be able to go really above or below that to a certain extent without huge other costs or time investments. So weighing that equation of inputs and outputs, if it doesn't make sense for you, not saying that webinars might not be your golden ticket to pipeline, but if you find that they are worth your time, production is also a very key element. Then I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to talk about a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So production is the moment we're in right now. So I think the biggest thing to think about when you're planning a webinar is that webinars don't have to be boring. There is like this traditional belief of, webinars of, the past 15 years that it's just people attending and someone droning on with a 1,000-page slide deck and reading off the slides and talking at you, which yes, in some instances that is the right medium, but not always. There's so many different ways. It's really important that you focus on creating an experience and focusing on quality. And so you can do that through the different ways you execute your webinar. I like to call it edutainment. So no matter what, you want to think about that experience that people are executing and the experience that you're building. Think about, would you want to attend? Would your target audience want to attend? Would anyone at the rest of your company want to attend? And really think about how you build that experience in that production and the actual event. So there's three key foundation areas that you want to focus on, which is your technology, your speakers, and your content. And so when you think about technology, it's how you're actually hosting your event. So we're hosting through Zoom today, but there are so many different vendors, especially since COVID, and technology you can use, but it's what your goal is for output. Do you want it to integrate with your CRM? Do you want to be able to have smaller break-off sessions? Do you want to be able to switch between on-demand already pre-recorded video and live video and have people come on stage and leave stage? So it's really thinking about what are the needs of your business and what technology will help you achieve that, but then also considering budget in that. And there's obviously, you can start in one place and continue to move up with different platforms to help you execute that. And with technology, going to the next one, speakers, is making sure you test that technology and going through that, with your speakers, with those participating and executing the webinar. The next piece is the people. People are what makes your live events. So webinar, live events, depending how you want to market it. Thinking about who are the people that are going to help you execute this. Is it external experts? Is it influencers? Is it experts within your company and bringing them in? Is it two people talking? Is it two people on a deck? Is it a video? How are you doing that? And that's one of the things to think about. And then it's the content that you're sharing. And how you present that can be really different. I'm gonna have Scott stop sharing for a second here. And it really changes the experience. So Scott and I having a conversation versus us sharing a deck, or maybe there could be a third or fourth person here as well. How that content is then presented to you creates a completely different experience. So going back to kind of what I talked about of the different types earlier in the session of, having a panelist, a group of, experts, or having a fireside chat, thinking about what helps build the best experience for that production. Because, Scott's talked through how you're going to get people here and, maximize your registration. But then once you're hosting your event, how are you going to keep them here? And what is the value you're going to provide and an experience that they're going to remember so that you can continue to grow them as part of your, whether it's your community or move them to a different place in your pipeline, depending what that goal is. So making sure that the experience you're building in your webinar or live event reflects what you're trying to achieve, and also the audience that you're presenting to and the message that you're trying to get across. And there's so many different ways to do that. Again, there's a million different combinations. There's no right or wrong way to do it. But there is, and really the sky's the limit. You'll see, you might see the way someone does a webinar and you think, oh, I think that would work really well for my company. Or maybe it's like, hey, in my company's mind, it's just webinars are that boring process where I'm going to have a sales guy or girl or someone from my company just read through a deck I gave them. And it doesn't have to be that way, but nor does it have to be the way that Scott are doing and I are doing ours today, or the way someone else has done it. So you need to find what is going to be best for your audience. But the three pillars in kind of creating that is figuring out the technology you're using to make sure that those attending have a good technical experience, that your speakers are helping you in creating value, and the content that you're covering provides that value as well. And those are your key points in building the actual webinar, the production of it. Because after that, it doesn't end there. You're going to have people that attend and people that don't. It's that you want to be able to continue to distribute it. So can it be cut up to help nurture? What is the quality of what you created in that webinar, that it just doesn't end at the end of that 1 hour or 45 minutes or 30 minutes and it's forgotten about, but that you can use that content continually after and build an experience that's on demand, or maybe it's clips of, different pieces that can help people learn about different things. So keeping that holistic picture in mind of that this is a piece of content that you're creating once in the production and going live, but then you can continue to distribute it after, and understanding how you can continue to use that. And I'm going to pass it back to Scott.
Thank you for that. All right, I'm gonna keep chugging right along here. This is our final section, and it's kind of one of the most important yet least focused on aspects of running a successful webinar, in my opinion, and that is kind of just nailing the follow-up. Hosting a great business webinar is nothing if it doesn't drive the great business results. So ensuring that business results happen should be paramount to your webinar strategy. So you probably are all familiar with trying to do some email outreach or nurturing after the webinar concludes. Typically this looks like the marketing team will hand over the list of webinar registrants to a sales team for some warm outreach, and maybe there will be a few interested replies. This is how I started out kind of doing this mostly. And then this is something I think, it's definitely something I think that still should be done for a sales-led B2B business. But over the years, I also discovered there's a lot more opportunity on the table without, annoying your audience too much. They can be done tastefully to reach them a little bit more. Nowadays, I like to think about webinar conversion in three main parts, and that's post-registration, during the webinar, and then post-event as well. So jumping right into post-registration, I basically just mean following up soon after someone fills out your form. So if it could still be 2 weeks away from the webinar, but you're reaching out right after the registration action has taken place. So we don't have to overcomplicate any of this either. For this post-registration follow-up, I just set up a quick automated email sequence that gets sent from a sales team member. And I found that the messaging that works best is, friendly, relevant to the topic, and not pushy at all. You may get a lot of replies from people that aren't interested in a meeting per se, but are still positive and kind of opens the line of connection. For example, as a registrant of this webinar, you may have received this follow-up email about 30 minutes after you registered. And if so, you met MarketerHire's criteria for kind of being a qualified prospect, and the message would have been sent from someone to see if there was interest, kind of revealing, pushing back the curtain here. But above all else, these types of sequences work really well because they are timely. I typically see about 4 times the number of replies to the post-registration sequence versus following up afterward, and roughly 2 times the amount of influenced opportunities. So even though it's might not be, might be someone replying like, thanks, I'm good, gonna watch the webinar first, you still see quite a few more opportunities just because you're reaching out at a better time. Next, during the webinar is also a great time to try to convert webinar attendees. A lot of times, something as simple as showing a call to action is what will trigger someone to actually follow through and take the action. So putting a QR code, for example, in your slides leading to a demo form or booking link can help maximize conversion. For example, if you're interested in hearing how MarketerHire can help match you with a marketer who has lots of experience launching and managing webinars, you can scan this QR code here to book time with Dan, our freelancer matchmaker. And then another tactic is some platforms like Goldcast or Wistia also have a CTA button built into their platform, which can make it easier for attendees to convert. It's the end goal is right there. If they do see the webinar content at any point, want to talk to the team, they just have access right there. And finally, you should all still be doing post-event follow-up as well. This is the moment that all your promotion has been leading up to, so you can kind of capitalize on that momentum by reaching out to engage prospects at a timely manner. Again, either You can automate sequences or have sales send them manually, depending on how many registrants you have and how important personalization is to your organization. But since you have a good chunk of registrants that attended and an even greater chunk that did not, typically, I like to create 2 separate sequences with slightly different messaging for attendees versus no-shows. And typically, I also like to include the recording link in the first sales follow-up email, so that email gets perceived as, having a good purpose, offering some value, but then also messaging, inquiring lightly if there's any new interest in a solution like yours after viewing the webinar, and then kind of offering up that CTA of, time to meet or learn further about your products or services. It's also important to note that your follow-up strategy should adapt as it makes sense for you. That's kind of been a key consistent note throughout this presentation. It depends is like very popular marketing answer. But if it's a super top of funnel webinar not directly related to your products at all, maybe having the sales team reach out, asking for a meeting doesn't make sense and isn't the best strategy. You might also not want to have all of those steps of follow-up or notifications if you don't want to seem pushy or overwhelm your audience. It's really up to you. And it's up to you to test those waters and see what works best for you. But these are all just kind of things I find works best for B2B SaaS. All right, so to kind of close things up, we've covered a lot today, from topic selection to maximizing registration and attendance to nailing the follow-up. So I'm hoping that was helpful overview of the tactics to kind of increase the success of your webinars. To reiterate from before, running good webinars takes time, and it also takes a solid long-term strategy and also consistent, excellent execution. So if you're planning to start doing more webinars or wondering why your webinars aren't working or wondering how to scale them, make sure you've properly thought about all of these pieces that go into creating and promoting and managing a successful webinar. And then, also make sure they're producing the growth outcomes you're after. Don't give up right away is a word of advice, but also be realistic. And if they're not worth your time, if you can't crack the code for making them working, then you can always invest your time and budget elsewhere. But you may need to commit more time before you can really begin to kind of see and reap the benefits that I've been able to kind of see over the years of building up these programs. And if you're worried about not having time or expertise to properly run your own successful webinar program, that's kind of where MarketerHire can step in and help. MarketerHire just basically makes it easy to find top marketing freelancers with experience in these different domains. And so freelancing makes it possible to scale up the output of your team without incurring high costs of full-time salaried workers. And it's on your schedule while sticking to a flexible budget. And MarketerHire goes through the process of vetting all of these to make sure it's the top 1% of expert marketing talent. And then we can then help match with the right clients based on the size, industry, and more. So we actually pulled a list of freelancers with webinar experience specifically for you folks on today's call. There are 90 available on the MarketerHire network with experience across different verticals and industries, ready to help you build and optimize your webinar programs. So if you're interested at all in interviewing any of them, learning more, you can book a custom scoping session with Dan using the QR code to the right, who will help match you with the right marketer for your business. But with that kind of concludes our presentation for today. If you have to leave, thank you very much for joining us. But if you can stick around, we have a lot of great questions that came in, and we'll do our best to answer those over the next few minutes. Cool. So one of the questions that got submitted was, we're getting signups for webinars, but people don't show up. How can we get higher attendance, and how should we engage with those who don't show up? So that's a great question. We covered this a bit before, but just to expand on it a little more, I think kind of following those two easy steps at first, making sure your confirmation email makes it really easy to add the calendar events to the prospect's calendar. That should lead to higher attendance. Also worth noting, if you're begin to promote your webinar too far in advance, people could like completely forget about it by the time it reaches it. So consider maybe just kind of using a 2-week promotional period before the webinar, so you don't, have all of these people kind of forgetting about it or planning over it. Then there's also the reminder emails, having that as a strategy, making sure that people are aware, especially as it gets closer to the webinar, is always good. And then finally, for attendance, you can also see if it works for you, kind of testing an incentive. I think I find starting off easiest is like a gift card. Like there's a couple vendors that have online gift cards. You can see if a $5 gift card incentivizes any increase in attendance. And then if it's worth that cost to you. It kind of really depends. Like I mentioned, it comes down to that equation of like if the added cost has more value added to it, which will be different for every company. But then in terms of engaging with those who don't show up, I still think there's a lot of value in a registrant that doesn't attend. So just kind of making sure your message is tweaked to focus on that and like be relevant. But then asking like, why was there interest in this topic? Are you looking for new solutions? Like, is there something, and obviously this is where like knowing your customer and what their goals are and challenges are is really helpful to creating a message that's compelling. But basically a registrant gives you kind of an intent signal. This is important to them. Let's reach out in a timely manner, even if they don't actually see the presentation. And of course, sharing the on-demand recording presentation with them is definitely do that as you reach out. Another question, how can you attract people that are not already customers using your product? This can be kind of difficult too. And we also see like a lot of companies will have a prospect database and also a customer database. Customers obviously have more trust. They know your brand. They stand to benefit more from something that you can talk about. So you'll often see a higher conversion from customers. But you also hopefully have a good prospect database that you can reach either from your email database or your social media following. And of course, those things can't be solved. Like those things will have to be driven as separate programs to kind of build up an email database, build up a social following. But what you can do is I make sure to not just have webinars that are specifically about your product or solutions. Try to make it more broad. Try to make it like anyone, no matter what product you use in this category, can benefit from this education. And that's where you will start to, you don't make it a niche sales pitch about your company. You make it about the actual learnings, and not make it like solo to just you can only benefit if you're using our product. That might be obvious, but of course, with like it varies per customer, and you just want to find those topics that are generally interesting to the wider audience. Then how are you attributing webinar to pipeline if users come back and buy through a different channel? That's a good question. I just set it up where I look for opportunities created at once the promotion for the webinar starts. And then I usually have like a 30-day look back period. So it's like if they happen to register for the webinar and an opportunity gets created 3 weeks later, I am going to attribute that, and it's a little, that can be a little manual depending on how you have your automation or attribution system set up. But that's what I would consider as webinar pipeline. It started with a webinar and is hopefully engaged through with your sales team after, or they sat for the webinar, went away, came back to the website after getting, some interest or thinking like, oh, I should kind of implement that thing. And then you can kind of see just again the timestamps of when things happen. And that's how I attribute it to webinars.
We
All
have a
right.
couple of questions here, Scott.
Yeah. Some other questions?
Yeah. So one is, can you talk about the tech stack to run these? I'm curious about what solutions people are using to run webinars, from email, calendar invites to actual video. And for that, most platforms do all of that for you. So Zoom, for example, will send calendar invites. It does the video here and allows you to connect to a streaming platform. If you want to also stream to LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitch, you can do that as well. Other platforms we've mentioned like Wistia and Goldcast and Zuddle, and there's a million more, have some type of integrated solution. So it's just deciding what is important to you to have included, and obviously budget. So some integrate with HubSpot or Salesforce, some don't. Some have email come out of their platform and some don't. So it's figuring out what fits and what your needs are and also your budget. I don't know if you have anything more to add to that, Scott.
Yeah, I'll just add that's something like I've looked into a lot over the years of like what webinar platform is best. I kind of like all reliable. I like to consider Zoom. It's often the cheapest solution with like a webinar license. It offers like, kind of the best integrations. With HubSpot, for example, you can really get clear information there and kind of automate a lot of the follow-up or, registration info. But then I had mentioned earlier, like Goldcast or Wistia, those have other unique features like offering a CTA button in the webinar player, and it's only internet based, which is kind of a nice from a user experience. But I know Wistia is not incredibly expensive. Goldcast is more on the more expensive side. So it really depends, like, what's your investment in your webinar strategy and webinar program. If you're running webinars all the time and it's like a key part of your growth trajectory or your growth plans, then maybe it's worth getting something that's more dedicated, has these additional kind of follow-up features. But yeah, I think any webinar program can still be successful with bit more basic tools like Zoom and, HubSpot for reaching people via email. And then repurposing the videos is just like any editing software will work to kind of like get clips and, trim up the on-demand recording, stuff like that.
Great. And the other one is I use LinkedIn Live and StreamYard for production and streaming. I struggle to get consistent attendees through LinkedIn and know that email would help in a huge way. How do you go about sending mass email invites to privacy professionals and then actually registering them instead of opting out? I'll take the beginning of that. I think it's important, like LinkedIn is really great, but I would recommend doing that in addition to having it come through a platform like Zoom or one of the ones we just kind of mentioned. That'll get you data into your CRM, whereas LinkedIn is a little bit harder to understand. Did they engage throughout? How long were people on? Who were the people on that actually attended? So I think pushing to LinkedIn is fantastic, but also making sure that you can have another platform that you can enrich that information and data. And then for the email part, it's important to segment. I work in cybersecurity, so those people are very wary of emails. So I totally understand that pain point. It's really important that you're sending them emails that apply to them and not mass sending, because they are going to opt out. They might even already have extensive filters on. And once they opt out once, their company is blocking it. So especially in that industry, but also goes for others as well, is really making sure it's not always about quantity, but quality. So sometimes you do need to start and build from there, and really look at who you're targeting based on the topics and thinking about those audience. Maybe every webinar doesn't apply to everyone on your email list. Scott, what else do you have to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I also work in cybersecurity, and promoting webinars to privacy professionals is one of the tougher areas you'll have in terms of like opt-outs. It's widely known that industry is like lower click-through rates, higher unsubscribe rates. I still, it depends really on where you're starting from with your email database. Sometimes you'll come into a company that has already, many thousands of people available to promote. Otherwise, you'll have to build that up over time, which is often, lots of other marketing tactics to accomplish that. So it really depends where you're starting from. But I would definitely still try to like figure out a way to work in email promotions because they can be very successful. You will get people unsubscribing to some extent. but as long as you're providing, not too many emails and you're providing valuable content, that should be kept to a minimum. And those people unsubscribing might not be engaging with your brand anyway. But it can emails definitely spike registration, and they can help with better follow-up because you do have their contact information. But yeah, you're right. It is a loaded question. And it's again, like, unfortunately, an answer of like, a little bit. It depends. It depends on your business. It depends on your audience. But yeah. All right. I think that's pretty much all the questions we have. And since we're overtime now, I just want to thank you all for joining us today and sticking around until the end. Thank you, Lauren, and for joining me and talking through all of our webinars, all of our webinar expertise so far. If you have any further questions or want to learn more about hiring freelancers through MarketerHire or from webinars from either of us, please contact us at marketerhire.com or on LinkedIn. And we'll see you later. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.